for your patience. My name is Patricio Davila. I'm the curator of the Diagrams of Power exhibition. I'd like to start off with acknowledging the territory that OCAD is situated on. It's the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, of the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I think it's particularly important to reflect on that traditional territory, especially with today's talk on mapping, on the expression of a particular politic through mapping, and the use of mapping in colonization, in the dividing up of territory, the use of maps for the command and control of a population. So hopefully throughout the amazing talk that Philippe will be giving us, we can have a moment to reflect that particular dynamic where we are right now. I'm super, one thing I want to explain, I'm using a microphone not so you can hear me better. There's no speakers connected to this microphone. It's a prop. No, it's not a prop. It's in order to record it because this is a limited amount of tickets that we were able to provide, and we want to be able to represent it online for people who weren't able to be here or be in Toronto for this talk. Philippe Rekacewicz is a cartographer, a geographer, and someone who I've been really looking forward to bring to Toronto because of his over a decade, I think, of work in radical cartography, especially in Europe, bringing together radical cartographers in order to interrogate the role of the map, of these forms of visualization that promote particular types of political stances and that possibly can counter that. We have about an hour and a bit, so Philippe would like, after our discussion, I've learned that Philippe would like to use a chunk of that to show slides and examples, but it feels that a lot of the most interesting parts will be the Q&A to see your particular experiences, your particular takes on some of the examples that he shows and knowledge that you have that you can contribute to this discussion. Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is the first act of manipulation because we are going to speak about how we manipulate minds with maps. So if you have a microphone which is not linked and you pretend it's linked, so it is the first act. It's the first lie. Like mapping is it's basically a question of lie. So it is that. We are going to do a journey through cartography, through maps, and I will try to present and to show you some of the examples. I would like to start by saying that for me, mapping, cartography, representing the world is more a tool rather than an art in itself. I feel myself as being really, truly a geographer, which means I don't know if we are scientists, but someone studying, trying to deconstruct space and territories to understand how this space and territories is functioning, how the communities are literally producing the space, and mapping cartography, visually representing, visual representation, I use it really as a very efficient tool to express the findings and what I have been understanding by the observation. So it's not really something which could be considered as an art or as a discipline as itself, but really as a very efficient tool to convey messages. Which means that, of course, when we do research, if we are all in the research field or academic, we have an intention or intuition. So we are looking for something. Maybe we find it, maybe not. Maybe what we understand is not true. Anyway, we have to try. And maps, as well as narrative, as well as artistic installations, are a tool to express, in addition of the narrative of the text, to express what we what we are finding. So this is very important because after all what you are going to see here, which is the result, it's produced as a result of research projects, are either hand-drawn, either digitalized, either something else. And we choose the form according to the content. But we do never the other way around. So I've given this title, Cartography Between Science, Art, and Manipulation, because I wanted to show that the cartography really takes over science, because this is a discipline. It takes over art, because we use the mean of art to express ourselves with lines, colors, movement, intensity, contrast, and manipulations, because as you see here, I don't think it exists such thing as an innocent map. A map can't be neither neutral or objective, as we usually are taught. And this is reason for that, and I will develop the reason, but basically, first of all, it's extremely impossible to represent all what happens in the world on a small sheet of paper. So you have to do a choice, and this choice is, of course, done out of will, out of how yourself you understand the things, and you will exclude the elements that you think are not important, but from your point of view, and you will give the emphasis to elements that you think are important. But the things what you think is important is different for everybody. And at the end, you have a document which is a representation, a truncated representation of the reality. In other words, a lie, or a very subjective map. For me, it's beforehand. A map is beforehand not a representation of the world, and absolutely not a faithful representation of the world. But let's say we can say it's intellectual construction, politically or intellectual construction, which take out of the reality. It's based on real fact, things that happens. This is your inspiration, but you put in there a lot of your own phantasm, trauma, imaginary. Put 10 geographers in front of the same landscape, and they will tell 10 very different narratives, because they will react with their own education, their own belief, what they are, their own sensitivity to colors, fragrances, etc. So this is what is it, and I like to, and this conclude this introduction, to think the map as a permanent dialogue between reality and imaginary. And I'll try to convince you of that through the project that we are going to be through. And you see, with this first example, this is an exceptional painting from a North Korean artist. There was in Vienna a few years ago an exhibit. It was the only one, and I think it will be the first one and the last one in Europe, which were showing the art of all the North Korean artists. It was such a scandal, because the public and the audiences considered that was really supporting an extremely totalitarian regime by showing how beautiful and how nice the life was in North Korea. And right in the middle of the exhibit was standing this painting, and I took the picture because it expressed so well what I want to convey, some message, that the map here is also, beside the fact it's not innocent, it's subjective, it's also very often, and for very many countries in the world, maybe not France, maybe not Canada, maybe not Norway, but Korea for sure, Greece, Morocco, China, India, an extremely important element of the cultural identity. It's almost a logo. It's almost misrepresenting the form of the country in certain place in the world is like burning the flag. It's as bad as that. And I will tell some few stories that is showing this idea. When we speak of maps also, we speak about recognition. And in this drawing, there is two levels in the language. First of all, you recognize there is two subliminal messages. First of all, we immediately recognize the country. And if we have the background, if we are educated enough, and we know, and we read the newspaper and we look at the TV, we know that we're in front of the superpower, or the most powerful country in the world, and that this most powerful country in the world act extremely badly on the international context, on the international landscape. So the whole situation is full of symbols because this is all the elements you are mapping with. You have the authority. It could be symbolizing also the UN authority, which is also trying to rule the world or to solve the conflict. Just in one small drawing, we are very much into the image and these two-level recognition messages. And of course, when we map, we are using graphical semiology, so we will use symbols. And it's also here, we are entering a very dangerous world because whatever the symbols we use, symbols, colors, movements, form, contrast, fragrances do not have the same signification whatever the country you are. The green, for example, has not the same signification in Saudi Arabia and in Ireland. The same for the red, the same for the blue. And the symbols also, like you see in this cartoon from this French cartoonist, Sampé, that you have the same representations with a little bit different, with a complete different meaning, which is opposite, and which make actually extremely also difficult to choose the appropriate graphical semiology when you work into an internal context. During the period I was editor in Le Monde in France for this newspaper for 30 years, and I was responsible for the production of geopolitical atlas that were translated in English, in German, in Greek, in Estonian. We had like 30 languages, and those atlases had colors. And the French likes to be spectacular. If you want to sell it, you have to be spectacular. I'm a little bit ashamed of saying this, but you have to be red. It has to be blood to say this is bloody planet, war everywhere, etc. And you can expect that the people will buy the atlas. But what is possible in France was apparently not possible in Germany, because when we send the atlas with the cover, with requiring that they translate and sell in Germany with this cover red with blood, with these very spectacular expressions, the German publisher said it was no questions, because in Germany, since the trauma of the Second World War and the Nazi period, they couldn't be so explicit. So they choose the very lovely, nice blue cover with the word, and they just say hope and opportunities, geography of war. So it means that they really choose to put a terminology which was much more positive than ours. They have excluded the blood, sex, and spectacular images like people dying all over Africa. To promote this, just because culturally, since the end of the Second World War, it was just not possible. And we have, of course, we cartographers working in international context have to deal with those things. But it means also we have to work a lot, and we have to learn, to read, and to learn a lot on all those cultural aspects. Because the exhibit is on power, I wanted to emphasize the idea of power, map and power, and reflect a little bit on what was making map a very powerful element, a very powerful tool. And I found at least 3 reasons we are going to examine along this presentation. And there is various ways to consider this relationship between cartography and power. What makes map so powerful? And so powerful at this extent that since few years you have, of course, noticed that there is an absolute explosion of the infographic production, the visualizations. You just push the button on internet and millions will appear. All the newspapers, they have their team on infographics, mapping, cartogram or whatever, all what is visual representation of data, whether they are qualitative or quantitative. There is a plethoric production at this point that even me working in this field since more than 30 years, I'm losing myself. I'm not sure what is cartography and what isn't cartography, and I have the impressions that there is a race to produce the most spectacular, the most beautiful, and you have awards on cartography, and you have those all those very spectacular and artificial things. It's almost entering the world of show business, and I'm extremely confused about that. I'm very puzzled about the fact that cartography becomes that. There is a German cartographer, has had a TV show on the French-German channel Arte, and he were asked why he was still drawing maps by hand with color pen. And everybody thought that he's very conservative and he's very narrow-minded and he wants just to keep like it was. And he says, no, it's not, I don't want to keep the traditions. I'm not that interested. I'm not a reactionnaire. I'm not conservative. But what I aim to is I want to keep the high quality of what cartography is, intention and messages that you convey to the people. So, power. The map is powerful, and it's used by, let's say, powerful people. This is the first idea. The people which are the representative of power, corporation, politicians, people which are very rich, and using maps to impose their view of the world. And they will duplicate and bombing us with plenty of those maps, occupying TV, occupying encyclopedia, newspaper, social network through the lobbies, occupying all possible places in the public space, social network, with the hope that the representation that those very powerful people want to impose to us becomes what I call the new normal. And here it's very important because now it's so visible and it's very much related to marketing and advertisements, for example. We will speak a little bit of airports and how the airports are organized and how you can map the airport later if we have time to do, which I'm not sure. But it means that the advertisement so present is in the public space could be completely unacceptable, but it becomes normal and you accept it as something acceptable because it's present everywhere. And because it is present everywhere, we don't question ourselves anymore. And we think that the presence, the massive presence of something in the public space is something normal, while it's totally artificial or unacceptable. An example was with, I think it was DHL, this transport company, has paid hundreds of people, concierge and portier, just in front of at the time in front of the buildings, with plenty of package with written DHL, to make believe the people that that was like the public post office. That was DHL, and everybody was using DHL. So when you have DHL everywhere, and that was like for a full year, suddenly you take it as the new normal for transporting your letters and your package and everything, which is the process. In cartography, this is the same, and all very powerful lobbies are disseminating a number of maps on certain subjects. So this is, of course, GMO organism, for example, but many other thematic. Or when you grab a territory and you want to actually make believe it's yours, you also dump a lot of those maps to make believe that the representation is the new normal. This is an example here with Morocco and the conflict with Western Sahara. I'm not sure how many of you are geographers here in this room, I'm a geographer, so we speak about geopolitics. It will be very much question of power and countries. So I'll try to initiate a little bit on the possible problem which can occur here. Just this example to illustrate in the geographical point of view. This is Morocco and Western Sahara, and here is a conflict since the 70s. So it's already half a century, well, let's say, that they are disputing this entity. This entity was a former colonial territory, which were administered by Spain, and they decided to go. And since then, Morocco, Algeria, and Mauritania were fighting for having it. But there is also a people called Sahrawi here who wanted to declare their independence and tried to get it. So that's the background, that's the story. But what is interesting here is that since half a century, there is circulating everywhere a certain number of maps which are pure example of true manipulation. And we cannot say that one or the other map is more true or not true. It depends of your positions. And here I introduce another concept, which is the relativity of the cartographic representation. I'm very sorry if I feel you very uncomfortable. First, the map is not innocent, and secondly, it's completely relative. It really depends on your own belief, your own political opinion, and on what you rely. So if we want to have an element of comparison, we have to take basically one criteria. My criteria, I'm not saying it's the one, the best, etc. My criteria is international law. It means United Nations and recommendation of United Nations. It's let's say that it's the less worst I have in my disposal today. UN is not perfect. I was working for the UN for 13 years, so I know the house from inside. So it's far to be perfect for many reasons, but it's the less worst we have. It's actually the one representing the community of nations. And what says the UN in there? It says that this territory is a former colonial territory, but they changed the terminology. Now they don't say anymore that it's colonized by Morocco because they don't want to upset Moroccans, so they say it's a non-autonomous territory. The terminology in geography, in cartography, is extremely important. We'll come back on that. This said, there is several ways of considering what is this territory. And here we enter is what the legend. So we have the map, and you have not read the legend, and I will read it for you. But there is at least 6 possible ways to describe and to qualify what this territory is. The first one is that this is a territory occupied by Morocco with a full line in the sand here. Full censorship, those maps will never enter Morocco. I've been working for a newspaper publishing those maps, and each time we were losing 5,000 sales. Until the moment my chief editor decided to get rid of the map because he wanted to sell the newspaper in Morocco. Territory administrated by Morocco. This is a little bit more smooth, but you see there is a political will to downgrade a little bit the conflict. You can say this is a territory which is annexed by Morocco, or territory which is which was formerly belonging to Spain, without any other mention. You can say that this is a territory which is still waiting since 40 years. It's a referendum for autonomy. We have the right to do this in cartography, to define something, not completely, but just to be waiting for something. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways to describe the territory, and none of those ways are a coincidence. Each of those ways to qualify the territory is really a political will, a political decision. You can't be neutral because you have to choose one of those. And if you choose one of those, you position politically yourself on the geopolitical landscape. And this is what is true for this territory, is true for many others. And we have just 1 hour, so we won't be able to go through all of them. We'll just evocate Israel-Palestine because it's one of the most interesting in this respect, in terms of terminology, in terms of representation, in terms of denying the people. So that was for the representative of power, and of course, I forgot to show to you here, and it was the most important, that according to the actor, here you have the Moroccan representation, you see, with no border, and they will consider that Morocco is all this. And this is the representation according to the UN. They exclude this because they don't consider it to be part of Morocco. And here we have something which I call a non-representation, which is the choice of most of the publisher, because they want to have problems with Morocco, neither with the UN. So they try to do something which is very strange, but most of the time, actually, when you have a map of Mediterranean or North Africa, they manage to put a graphic on Western Sahara or the legend or the title. So it means they will exclude the problem so that they don't have a problem when they will go for negotiations in the Security Council, for example, or if they have to go on international meetings such as OECD or those which are involving those countries to not make them upset. I can tell you, I have a personal anecdote in this respect. When I was working for the UN, I was responsible for producing the set of map, the world map on which all the countries which we are gathering in Nairobi to decide how much money they would give to UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, so that this UN body could function. And you know that each country is giving money, like Japan 200 millions, United States 100 millions when they give it, Canada, etc. And the Chinese were a pretty good and huge contributor because they were, since 10 years, China is really implementing a green policy with installing a lot of windmills, and they have a whole plan. So they were counting on UNEP with giving a lot of money. But when they arrived in Nairobi, on the tables were the maps of Asia, and when they have seen that Taiwan was shown as a different color and an independent country, they left the conference. They boycotted the conference, and they said they will not come back only when each of the maps which were on the table were taken out and destroyed and replaced by appropriate maps, which shows that Taiwan is a province of the continental China. So I was responsible for that. So it means that we had one day to destroy everything and to recover, and there was no way to do it. Even though Taiwan functioned as a de facto independent state, but there is this chantage. Morocco is doing a chantage, Greece is doing a chantage, Korea is doing a chantage. All this to express the fact that the form, purely the form of the territory, the representation, we're not speaking about the territory because the situation on the field is something else. It is. And they cope with this situation. There is conflict, there is tension, sometimes they shoot on each other. But it's recognized by everybody. We are here in the world of representation, in the imagination, just the representation, you see? Nothing else. And this is, I mean, the war is also transferred in this field of representation. They don't really like it. The second, coming back to the relationship power, the second group of people or actors that have found out that the map was a very efficient tool to show what they want to do, this is the activists that found the map, the activists, those who want to fight against the power, of course, this is the counterpart, that the cartographic expression is extremely powerful to demonstrate how the world dysfunction in their point of view, and they use it to concretely show the dysfunctions in the field of surveillance, control, too much control, too much surveillance, social justice, discrimination, equality, poor against rich, woman against men, etc. So we envisage the power of cartography at least along those two approaches, but there is a third one. So this is the political approach. Who governs, who decides, who imposes the representation of the world, the way someone wants us to see the world, to force us to a certain image. Not speaking about another power of the map, which is the power of the map through the artistic approach. Because the map is definitely an artistic object with colors, movement, it is powerful because it is an image. And when we arrive to a place, this is striking. And of course, building those images with red, blue, green, with fat line, with thin line, this is already introducing elements of manipulation in the map. And I can show you that in a second. So this is those three things. And because the activists has used this as an element to demonstrate what they do, since, let's say, since the beginning of 60s, with the beginning of the appearance of the critical geographer or radical geographer, mainly Bunge in Detroit, but many others after him, of course, has taken this path, has appeared a little bit after what we have called radical cartography or critical cartography. We find the word counter mapping or participative mapping, and probably some of you are very familiar with this. This is basically involving the civil society, involving the communities, so to propose and to show them how they could actively choose, organize the way, organize where the territory and the space where they are living, and basically involving them in the territory making, and showing them that they can recover a certain form of sovereignty on the place where they live. So it's working. It has working with huge success in some parts of Brazil with indigenous communities, Xingu Basin. The government has recognized a certain form of sovereignty, and they don't do anything without having the authorizations of the communities. There is various experience in Canada, as you know, and also in Norway with the Sami people, where it has not been working very well, although it's good on the paper, but on the field, it's not very good. But this is ongoing. This is an ongoing work, and I am part of an initiative with the Concordia University and representative of a number of First Nation people, which try to learn and to develop participative mapping, because they have understood that this is really a very efficient tool they will have at for them to support in front of the court the claim for a certain number of sovereignty, a certain form of sovereignty, a certain number of things that they want to recover. So radical cartography, I want to try to define it a little bit. And to define what they mean, so that you are clear with that. So it was clear that in what we call the conventional cartography or traditional cartography, I call it sometimes orthodox cartography, but orthodox is a little bit too strong definition, but that's okay. And we have always understood this discipline as exact science based on reliable data. And of course, we cartographers, we were so proud of us with creating a neutral and faithful image of the reality and faithful representation of the reality, etc. But of course, this was totally ignoring the political and social use of the map and the role they can play in propaganda and protest, as I just explained. So this radical or critical cartography has emerged. And what is interesting here, which was not thought by the orthodox cartographer, the radical cartography has been thought really very immediately as a mixture, a very interesting mixture of art, geography, activism, science, poetry, literacy. Really all was integrated in there. The most important, of course, was to convey some messages. The funny thing is that there was in 2008 a huge meeting in Vienna called Art and Cartography, Cartography and Art, Who is Right? And during this symposium, I was there 3 days, and the orthodox cartographer with the radical cartographer, with the artists using maps in their art and the activists using maps, they just fought for 3 days and they just couldn't hear themselves. They were convinced that they were in the same field, but there was no way they could find a field of understanding, and it was just scream and insults everywhere. The orthodox cartographer saying that it's not because you draw approximately something that you can call yourself a cartographer. You know, with this kind of maps, many times the scientific geographer, cartographers has challenged me by saying that this was not cartography, but this was unfaithful representation of the world and biased representation of the world. So they didn't want to include me in the field, in the academic field, very prestigious of geographer, just because they thought that cartography is really something that it was an insult to what was the orthodox cartography. So here this committed cartography has found a real vocation. And this cartography, those radical cartographers, what they were doing, they were just demanding social justice. They were just denouncing political and economic practices. And I introduced a new concept here, which was done by the geographer sometimes, that what is interesting with the radical cartographers was the first to really deconstruct the space, to deconstruct social phenomena, to deconstruct the processes, how a community is organized and how a community is possibly producing its territory. And this was something which was interesting, to show actually what was invisible and to map it and to propose it. So the most interesting also that was implemented not by geographer but more by architects, militants, urban planners, and much later geographers like me. But we were arriving really late in the landscape. So the project has proliferated all over the world. We are going to speak on some of them, we have been we dared at the end challenging traditional representation which were unquestionable, like the representation of borders, for example, administrative division, etc. I said also that doing a map is very much a question of point of view. So I have found something that I wanted to share with you so that you could understand a little bit better what I mean by a map representing a point of view. This is an advertisement for the newspaper The Guardian in the 80s. And it illustrates extremely well what I want to explain with the map. So I will propose it to you, but I hope that...
An event seen from one point of view gives one impression. Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
So yeah, I do not have action in The Guardian, but yeah, maybe the new Guardian is a little bit is not as good as the as it was before. Yeah. So this is interesting because basically you will see, now we go through the project before it's too late, that you can do absolutely everything with those visual representation, and then we are victims, whatever we do and whatever the sense we are moving, of complete manipulation. And here I would like to do an evocation to persons that I have a great admiration for. This is Lisitsky, the Russian designer, the Russian or Soviet designer, Lisitsky, which have been since I started my first year of geography, really a great inspirator in terms of movement, in terms of form, in terms of symbolization, perception. Lisitsky is really one of the most subtle designer of this period, and whatever he does is beautiful. And each time I have been discovering new artwork from Lisitsky. For me, Lisitsky is really a cartographer in the sense that he's really using those three fundamental elements: point, line, and on surface, exactly like Kandinsky has defined it in 1926 in this book. And it was just something as marvelous, and I was very much inspired. And Otto Neurath, of course, which has invented this the Vienna method of isotype. And at the moment where Stalin started with the first plant and were planning the second plant in 1929-30, he, through Lisitsky, but also through other people in Vienna, he asked Otto Neurath, which was working in Vienna, to come in Moscow to implement his method for producing atlases, geopolitical and economic atlases in Moscow. And he did one of those atlas, and I found this atlas. There is 3 copies remaining. One is in the Isotat archives in Moscow. One is in ILO in Geneva. Only God knows why. It's a mystery. They didn't even know that they had it. And one is in a library somewhere in the United States. And this atlas has been done in English or in American because it had to be presented in the Universal exhibit in New York to show how USSR was doing good compared to United States, and especially with this graphic, which shows the liquidation of unemployment. And it's very clear that between 1928 and 1931, they really managed to get from 1.5 million unemployed people to 0. And this is, of course, the result of the fantastic first plan. And the whole atlas is 162 pages, and everything is like that. This is based on true numbers. So there is here, it's backed up by statistics, so it's very seriously made. But at the end, Otto Neurath was very suspicious on the quality of the data, and he has said it to indirectly to Stalin, which has expelled him from the country without paying him the honorarium. And at that time, and it was finished with the Neurath period there. So this is really for illustrating at this point that you are, all of us, we are seeing those figures, those maps, those infographics, those cartograms. And I'm sure that most of us, we don't question them in terms of, is it true, is it not true, how it is done. This morning, you have been showing a slide which was like a checklist of what you should do when you have those kind of infographics. But we never do it. I mean, maybe a few of us will have this critical view or this critical idea of really challenging with this checklist what it is, but we don't. And actually what we do is we swallow all those cartographic production, all those graphics, and we take it for granted. And this is shaping our view of the world. This is also why this is extremely important. So the project now, before it's too late. To illustrate this, there is a number of projects and a number of ideas that I want to go through together with you. I mentioned this morning the first project was a project called Geography of Plenty, Geography of Empty. And the idea was what I was evoking this morning. We know there is rich people, we know there is poor people, we know there is men and women, and the treatment of men and women in the world are far to be equal. There is discrimination. There is discrimination in between the people in terms of revenue. We know that qualitatively, but quantitatively, I think we are very few of understanding the extent of the length of the gap in between the two. So that was the aim of the project, to try to make understand what was the gap of the project, so that it would serve as a base for debate. So we start by that, we start by showing, and after we can eventually, or we can possibly say that we do something about it. And for that, it's not necessary to use extremely complicated data. Those has been done with very classical data, GNP per capita per country. Take the two graphs here. This one represents the GNP per capita and per year for the 1 billion people living in the richest country in the world. This represents the GNP per capita from the same periods, 70 to 2010 or 2020, for the 1 billion people living in the poorest country in the world. So it represents roughly 32 countries on each side, but this is completely we can do this comparison. I have standardized the data so that there is a comparison. And you have this image going from $2,000 to $50,000, and here the same scale, it's comparative. And when we presented this graphic, everybody said, but this is stupid. We see nothing. It's empty, so it's not interesting. And we thought the opposite. We thought this is empty and this is interesting. The emptiness here has a political and economical significance. And we have introduced the emptiness. Well, all the geographers usually and the academic says, no, if it's for showing nothing, then it's not worth. You should increase the scale here. Maybe you see a little bit those things, because actually in 40 years, the wealth of the poorest country went from $100 to $500, so there was a delta of 5, while here there was a delta of 22, so it went like 20 times faster, the growth in those countries. And this indicator is the most classical indicator you can find, so it means that even with those very easy indicators and tools, you can start, depending on how you aggregate them and depending on how you present them, you can, let's say, define a concept and use it to start to reflect on this concept, on what is wealth and what is poverty. The figure shows many other things because it shows, for example, here there was the oil crisis, the first one, and the second one, and you see that it has been presented as a disaster, fantastic disasters, but after 5 or 6 years, the rich country, they have totally recovered. Here, 96, that was the crisis in Russia and in Asia, and everybody says this is the apocalypse, and it was described as such in the spectacular media. And you see what happened? It has recovered. Here we are in 2007, and it says it's the worst financial crisis since 1929, and it was the apocalypse. And but the state has given $1 billion so that the bank could recover. And you see what has happened. It took 1 year, and then it was immediately recovering. But here we are stopping in 2011, and now we are $62,000 per people. So that means that it gives also this kind of information, while in the poorest country, you see the crisis has absolutely no effect, because anywhere it can't have an effect because they basically have nothing. The same analysis here is done with in a complete comparable graphics with what is the world GNP, productive GNP, and here what is the money used to speculate. So this is the money that turns all around the earth, and you see that we arrived here to $700,000 billion. And when I say this number, I'm sure that none of you can figure what it is. While you have here $62,000 billion, this is the GNP of the whole world, everything, services, tourism, production, etc. What 7 billion people are basically producing is 20 times less than what a nugget of people, few people can do just by pushing button for circulating the money around the world. So coming back to the intention of the maps, this is some tools that we want to use to start a debate, to try to raise awareness on what the extent of that, you see, and we have choose like Otto Neurath to be as minimalistic as possible so that we are sure that the people understand. Neurath, he wanted that the illiterate people and the people which have never been in school could have access to this economic information. So we had a little bit the same idea that people are extremely afraid of the stock exchange in the economy because they think they don't understand, but we wanted to give them some tools, extremely simple. This is why we have simplified very much, a little bit too much, so that they do understand. So the idea was, of course, to show 720 thousand billions dollars of financial product represented under the form of a planet. And by comparison, around this, you have the world GNP, 62,000. You have here 24,000 billions. This is all the wealth and all the raw material in value that you have in Democratic Republic of the Congo, just one country, it's that. And and you have some other stock exchange capitalizations, it's 58, and this is all what the households have. And here you have a very small one, $1,000 billion, and it represents, according to the UN, and this is what is interesting here, and this is the interest of this figure, international criminality, criminal activity, trade, human trade, animal trade, drugs, weapons, etc. And at the highest They estimated $1,500 billion. And what is interesting here is that they didn't have the idea to think that here you had also financial criminal activity. It's not included in the official statistic, international official statistic. And this is also a problem. This is why we have done these figures to explain that here you have people which operate at the margin of the legality. When there is a crisis, they get in, but they basically speculate. And there is here a great deal of criminality, which should be included here and which is not. So this is something, this is a question, and this is what visualization and map is intending to do. The last one on this geography, no, there is two ones. This is this one on the geography of empty and plenty, was to show and to challenge the idea that you had a very obscene and violent and brutal organizations in the way the labor was organized on each other part of the border. Everybody knows this Mexican-American border. Everybody knows that there is economic activity. But what we did here, we were seeking into the statistics, and we took the wage of somebody working in Mexico, and it's not necessarily Mexican. They could possibly be American citizen even, or but most commonly they are Mexican or South American or Central American, so it's more that. To find out in average with two industry situated on each other part of the border with not being, it's less than 1 kilometer. They're physically located less than 1 kilometer, where at the same level of qualification, hourly rate for a worker in America is $22, while it was $1 to $3 for somebody working on the other side. And they do the same thing. They work the same number of hours. They are probably socially less protected. So this, and there is, he is a border. So there is, behind the map, there is a whole political story. There is a whole agreement in between the country. There is a whole system, extremely complex, which serve, of course, I'm an anti-capitalist activist, so you have a recognized, which serve interests on the above, because there is such a complex circulation on the material. You have bits and pieces which are produced in Mexico, and they go and they are assembled for strategic things on the other side of the border, and they are finalized on the other side, so they can cross the border several times before they are packaged as merchandise and sent all over the world. The map here is to also, again, have this idea of raising the awareness for that. Rich, poor, so we had another figures. I want to show you some other things. So, I wanted also to understand what is the super rich and to try to find a way to recognize it. So we have done it under the form of an artistic installation. So this is a layout of something which is like 5 meters high, and we wanted also to do actually a real sphere with the two. And you will not see here this. This is one dot here, and it represents one family, one household, basically. And this family, I would like to introduce this family. This is the family, the Walton family. So you have Christy, Jim, Alice, Samuel, Robson, Anne, and Laurie Walton. So they are brother, married, and they are, you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this family, they own the largest supermarket chain called Walmart. 2013, they had in capital $172 billion. Just them, accumulates them. 172 billions. It's basically the richest family in the world. So we tried to find a way to compare and what was representing those 172,000. And that was 2013, and just before coming here, I checked with the new numbers. Now it's 230. So they are increasing. So there is nothing. It's like really a caterpillar. You can't stop those guys. So the Walton, they are American. So we were comparing with the average revenue of a normal average family in the United States for the same period, and that was $76,000. So if we want to multiply, we need to have more than 2.2 million families to have an equivalent of the money. It represents 2.2 million families represents all of them, $172 billion as a power of. It means that it's around 11 million people. That's the agglomeration of Chicago. So it means in clear that Walton family, they are as rich as the whole population of Chicago if this population would earn the average revenue in the United States, which is not the case, of course, because you have people which are much richer. But it gives an idea of the extent of the problem. And again, I draw no conclusion out of this. I want to deliver those documents as a testimony or as a base for the debate. That's the idea. The second project I would like to, in relationship to power, I would like to show to you is the power on the map. And I would like to, we were speaking about the representation of border, so we will be speaking a little bit about border with the example, and I said I would come back on Israel-Palestine. So we are not doing a presentation on Israel-Palestine, but here there is several things which are interesting and which illustrate really perfectly the concept I'm dealing with. Basically, these countries are in war for at least 1 century now, and nobody is really able to understand what would be the solutions. But apart of the fact that there is, for the time being, no solutions, there is action on the field, and there is some attempt of manipulation and attempt of pushing the people thinking away or another with being extremely present through the social network and through in the public space with the representations that the people wants to impose. It's the same between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The conflict over the Karabakh is the same with the two, China with Taiwan, Japan with the islands that they are disputing with China, etc. So here it's interesting. We thought it's interesting because it's a question of manipulation. And we thought that in the 90s we would have the hope. And this is this French cartoonist, Jean Cabu, was working for my newspaper. He had the idea to go to see Arafat, Yasser Arafat, that you see here, and Shimon Peres at the time. And he went just doing a very minimalistic drawing. He was drawing 2 flags. And he said, what do you think should be the future? So he started by Yasser Arafat, who was drawing this flag, the Palestinian flag. And then he went to see Shimon Peres, who have seen this flag. There was not the line at this time, who is drawing his flag by Israel. And he said that the symbol was saying, we think that Israeli people should live beside Palestinian people. So that was already a great progress. And then he gathered the 2 personalities in Paris, if I remember well, and they said, yes, but what is your conception of the state, nation state? What would you do? And this is Shimon, it's not Yasser Arafat, but Shimon Peres take the pen and was drawing this dashed line. And it's interesting because if it would have been a plain line, he would have endorsed the idea of the 2 solutions, the 2-state solution. But he didn't. And Jean Cabu was wondering whether he was thinking that the Israeli wanted to still have a control over the Palestinian to be sure that they will behave well, or if by this Dutch line it was meaning that at the end should be a sort of federation, like in Switzerland is a federation of states that should act at the same level. And today it remains uncertain. But you see here really the power of the minimalistic map and the schematic has played a tremendously huge role during all the process of negotiation. So it's interesting because you had Palestine on the right-hand side and Israeli on the left-hand side. And when you see the map, it's the opposite. You have Israel on the right-hand side, and what is Palestine should be here. So that was the utopia for the future. This has not happened, and we come back to representation here on the territory. And I took on purpose the one by the most leftist newspaper fighting against occupation, fighting against the discrimination to Palestinians. And on their first page, even though they are fighting, they are left, progressist journalists fighting against discrimination. And you have their extremely courageous journalists which are really defending the people, supporting the idea of the Palestinian state, the independence, etc. Even this newspaper, and it's for really saying that this kind of schizophrenia or paradox that they can't help on the idea that the territory should be this one, annexion here in the north of the Golan, and then they almost denied, as you can see here, this is the same color, that this is Israel, Gaza, as well as West Bank. We speak about terminology. You have three ways of representing them, and we have to be aware of that. This is the north of Israel. So this is the view of the Israeli authorities, annexion of the Golan, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and it's allowed. This is, and you see the difference, this is the Israeli territory viewed by the UN, with this Golan, which belongs to Syria. For them, it's very clear. It's an occupied territory, although it has been unilaterally annexed. And this is the radical Arab visions, where you have Syria, and the word Israel disappear completely. They don't allow, like in Algeria, if you have the word Israel on the map or on an atlas, it's censored immediately. It's came back. It's when I started my career in 1988, and I was presenting the Arabic version of the French atlas that I was responsible for. I went with the atlas. It was a return flight, Paris-Alger in the same day. They didn't let me enter. I had this atlas where was written Israel in clear, and they didn't let me enter the country, although I had an appointment with the Ministry of Education to present the atlas, but they said, no, there is no way you enter Algeria with an atlas with this name. So again, the huge power, it's just a map, it's just an atlas, the huge power of what is written and the censorship you can have among this. Now, another thing, and of course, I would like to insist very much about the terminology. It's position yourself. And here, if you are in Jerusalem and you speak about Jewish area or Jewish quarter in the occupied territory, on the occupied Jerusalem, on the other side of the Green Line, this is the positions to try to smooth it because it's occupied. It's not the same thing as if you say illegal Jewish settlement in an occupied territory, according to the Resolution 242 of the United Nations. But in Israel, it's forbidden. You don't say that. You don't say that the settlements are illegal because they are living there. So all is a question of chosen terminology. Now, I would like to finish with another concept and another idea. And this idea is about making map without maps. And maybe here we will enter a little bit more the world of design applied to the cartographic discipline. And I will show 2 or 3 examples, and maybe after we can open the discussion with us, by saying that we are so much focused on intention, the political intention, or the intention to show something, to convey some information, some trends, something which is happening in the world, or how the things has happened, that we nearly don't need a map. What we can do is figures. Like this one, for example, the history of the world in like a theater play. In 5 acts, first act, 1600 to 1800, you have a bipolar world, Atlantic system, Asiatic system, and there is very little contact in between the two. You see here is South America, Africa. Here you have Asia, Russia, America. So just that you can locate by yourself. End of the first act. Second act starts in this theater. 1800 to 1914. The Western world will take the monopoly over the whole world. And this is symbolized with this dashed line. So in yellow, you have sovereign states which are independent, but this is really very weak sovereignty. This is, I would call them dependent sovereignty to the big empire, which is Europe and then America, which take over the world and install with these blue arrows settlements almost everywhere, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, etc. End of the second act, there is an intermission. So we go and smoke a cigarette, drink a beer. And this intermission is this graphic. And this graphic is showing what was the colonized population relative to the total population of the world. And of course, also, again, simplicity, something very minimalistic. We want to show that at the beginning of the Second World War, just before the Second World War, 1938, half of the world population was colonized or was living under under the colonization, under the rule of the colonization. 1 billion people out of 2 billion people, so 50% of the population. And we can't really understand the ongoing problem and the ongoing geopolitical problem that occurs today if we don't have this in mind. So the vertical approach is as important. I mean, the contemporary approach and what happens now is as important as this horizontal approach with this temporal, historical remembrance of what has happened before. Okay, we finish the cigarettes and the beer, we close everything, and we go back to the theater. Third act starts again. In between the two World Wars, 1919, 1939, you remember at the end of the second act, there was a full monopoly. The empire, the rich empire, the Western rich empire had a monopoly over everything. But what happens is that there is appearance of one empire, Soviet Union, which make a first crop in this monopoly. See? And we see it here. And then after the Second World War, this crop will going even more. It will be China will arrive, and then they will settle a little bit in Africa and a little bit in South America, so that we come back as we were between 1600 and 1900 to a bipolar world. You see, it's a cycle. There was a bipolar functioning, and then suddenly it has disappeared. There was a monopoly, and suddenly there is a bipolar world. And then fifth act and last act, what has happened? I let a little bit if you want to take pictures, but all those pictures, I think Patricio will have in very good high definition, and you are very welcome to use them for your own presentation, course, whatever. It's I'm like cows. It has to be traceable, so you just have to quote where it's coming from. So, but it will be available for you on demand, so it's no problem. Last act is this one. What has happened after the fall of Soviet Union? We thought we would come back to an unipolar world with the full monopoly that the United States could have on the rest of the world, but it has not worked. They didn't manage to do that because there was a huge resistance. First of all, because there was countries that have emerged with research, development, military things, which is basically Russia, China, and India, Brazil, etc. And the continents, they have organized themselves to say no to this monopoly of United States, and you see, boom, they are bouncing. They did manage. They said no to the World Bank. They said no to the IMF, etc. And now we have, instead of being projected in an unipolar world with a new monopoly like the one that has occurred in 19th century, we are in a polycentric world with several centers of power that are emerging and which is becoming more and more powerful, and especially Russia, especially China and India, for quoting the three most important. End of the theater play, everything. And you see that what has happened here, I've been presenting for you 6 documents. There was not a single shadow of a map. It was only circle, oval, rounds, arrows, completely abstract, which means that to tell a geographical story, you don't need a map, but you need to have a good control or proposal over the design tricks and the design tool which is at your disposition, and this is the mean of art. And to illustrate this a little bit more further with more complex figures, and if you continue to use this concept, and now we are really in design, and actually have learned very much with designer. I took some course with designer, and I have been trained by designer to organize this production because I was really fitting to the geographical area, and then it was very difficult for me to disembodied myself from the map. Here you have a document that represents, for example, the routes, the main routes by volume of what is transported by containers from North America. This is the Pacific, Atlantic, Europe, Middle East, and Far East Asia. And at the end, with a document which is designed with the help of a designer that has helped me to work with parallelism by locating approximatively the geographical place. So there is an evocation of the geographical place, but there is no map whatsoever. It's just an evocation of it. We are really in a complete imaginary world, although we take over the reality, of course, but it tells the story here. You can say a lot on how this transport system is organized in the world. It's absolutely enough. You don't need to have a map. You don't need to have the continent. It's completely enough to build yourself an idea on how this complex system of container transport occurs over the world. To finish a little bit more complex, so you can draw metro line and things. This represents the students that are traveling from a country to study in another country. And here again, the system is so complex that we have to go through a very a deep abstract representation. So this one, there is two. This one represents where the students are coming from. So for example, you see here from China, you have like 200,000 or 250,000, they go to United States. There is also some that goes to Canada, but it's so little that we don't represent below a certain number. And of course, with this kind of document, you can make appear also some paradox that it looks like that China and United States are very, they are competitor in many aspects, but you still have most of the Chinese students, they go to United States to study, and it's very pragmatic. It's because they come with money. The Chinese government is paying a lot of money, like in Goldsmiths Institute in London. They accept Chinese students because they are paying for the salary of all the teachers in Goldsmiths Institute. Otherwise, Goldsmiths Institute would go bankrupt. So in this kind of maps, those narratives, this is the background. So this is something that can help for the narrative. I think I will stop here because it's far too long. I have, of course, a lot more to demonstrate and a lot more to show. All those images that you see here that you didn't have a chance to see, I will give the file to Patricio. He will put that on the Dropbox or somewhere where you could browse through the project. There is explanation and narrative. If you are interested, you're very welcome to go in there. So sorry that have been a little bit long, and thank you very much for this article. And now maybe you have some, maybe you are shocked, maybe you want to react or you want to ask anything. So this is the moment.
So is there anyone who has like an immediate question? They know exactly what they want to ask right away? Oh, okay, great.
I'm Peter Jones. I'm a professor here, and my question is about how you might conceive of intervening in the social space with maps that could interfere with our preconceptions. So other than galleries and presentations and kind of in the artistic mode, are there ways that you have kind of deliberately intervened or created experiments in intervention so that people can reframe the realities, kind of like the DHL example
Yeah.
that you gave us earlier,
But-
where
but
you're
the-
doing the intervening, kind of Joseph Beuys style.
On the other side, yes, there is. We have done I've been participating to actions, and people like activists like Trevor Paglen. He's the most well known, and I think Trevor Paglen you can find a lot on the internet. He's been interviewed on the Democracy Now! He has written a lot. I know him pretty well because like 15 years ago we have been starting together, and then when he did the CIA flight project, at this time I was extensively traveling in Central Asia and the Caucasus, and each time I saw a white plane parked on the tarmac of Bishkek, for example, it was clear that it was the CIA or FBI chartered flight. And surprisingly, it was public document, so I was sending him the number of the flight. He was putting that on his Excel sheet, and then he made this map. This is for answering to your question, because Trevor Paglen, he has done this action. He organized this network of people which were informing on where the flights were landing, in Ireland, for example, in Czechia, in Latvia, good friends of Sweden, even very good friends of United States, collaborator, we could say like that. And he, with also public data, because it's all public. When a body or institution is chartering a flight, it's public. You have the name of the one who chartered the flight and the owner of the air company, the number of the plane, date of departure, place of departure, place of arrival. And it was clear, very clear, when it was FBI ordered or CIA ordered. And he has established an Excel sheet with all those information, and he produced a map called the CIA flight. It's very easy to find. And he sent me the map, and it says, now this is the phase one. In radical cartography or critical cartography, there is two phases. We have decided this, it's random, but we have decided that we want two phases. First, we deconstruct the system. We deconstruct the way things are organized, or we deconstruct the territory to make appearing what is obscene or what is a construction. And then after, the phase two is to act. And Trevor Paglen, he has decided to rent, what happens? He has decided to rent a big advertisements in Los Angeles, if I remember well. It's also on the internet, actually. 13 meters on 3 meters. He has printed his map, and he put up his map with activists, called the TV, and says, look what the CIA, what your government, what your authorities are doing. They are transporting prisoners from Afghanistan to Latvia so that they're being tortured. Or in Czechia, there was Slovakia, there was Ireland, of course, Sweden, because they are very good friends. At Sweden, they would have given the guy of WikiLeaks directly if he was staying in Sweden, I'm sure. And then immediately the police, FBI came American way, so 40 cars. He was arrested. The panel was teared down almost immediately, but it stayed like 2-3 hours. And this is the action on the public space. So it answers exactly to your question, but it was too late. And because of Paglen, the American authorities has stopped those flights completely, because it was, of course, obvious that they couldn't continue while the things were so obvious. So, and I have a great admiration for Trevor Paglen. First of all, it's very courageous what he did. He has really taken enormously risk for himself, for his life. And secondly, he really did it. I don't think I would have had the courage for doing this. And since then, of course, now he's starting to work on other projects, but he's very well monitored by the government, of course. And this is, I'm very happy, because this is really extremely efficient way of being a geographer or being an activist or being a cartographer working in this sense. He wanted to denounce something which was totally unacceptable in the framework of what we expect to be a democracy, even though we know that the United States is not precisely a democracy, nor Israel is a democracy, nor the countries that becomes populist in Europe are becoming something which is non-democratic. But we pretend to be democratic, to have a governance. And this efficiency, I'm very admirative, and then we were trying to do the same thing. So the second example I have is a group from Argentina, and I don't remember exactly their name, but it's easy to find, and I will give it to you. I think I have noted here. In Argentina, you have this group of people. Yeah, I think so. I think it's them, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe it's them, but I'm not entirely sure. So, no. This is not them. It's another one. Well, I will find them. What they did, they understood that during the period of Videla, there was I don't know the word in English, bourreau. You had some military which have killed enormously much people. They took helicopters. They were throwing people from helicopters to the sea, and then there is several thousands of people that disappeared like that. And when Videla was kicked out, suddenly they disappeared completely in the populations, and nobody was really interested, and nobody was hearing of them. But this group remembered very well because they had friends that has disappeared, and they said there is no impunity. We want to do something. And instead of doing something which would be an action, a political action in a traditional way, which would have not worked because probably it would have been stuffed by the government, they decided to do differently. They have worked very, very much to identify where those guys were, and sometimes they changed their name. And they have identified all the villa and all the houses, the places where they were in the neighborhood of Buenos Aires. And they decided to do touristic tours. So during a night, they went and they planted panels, exactly like in front of Eiffel Tower or touristic things. Yeah, and then you have the text was all the people they were killed, what they were suspected to do. This one, he took an helicopter and he was throwing 10 or 12 activists in the sea, whatever. And they rented some bus with Japanese tourists, or and they went with microphones saying, "Here is living this guy," etc. And it was really, I mean, there was nothing else to say that first it was funny, and secondly it was very efficient because some of those people, the government couldn't stay alone because they had gathered the evidence with the help of lawyers. Some of those people have been arrested, and some of those people are today, and it was like 15 years ago, and this is in Berlin when I met this group where they were describing this action. They are still in jail. So this is here again, an action on the public space that was tremendously show its efficiency for doing this. I've not had the chance to present the project on which we work since 10 years or so, which is called Duty Free Shop, and which is studying how the public space is in airports, in railway station, and even in the street is really grabbed by commercial interest and private interest. But here again, in the airport of Oslo, there was public space, and you entered in this terminal. In the railway station, you had free water, free Wi-Fi. There is plants. You had fountains where you could have free water. And there was even a period when I arrived in Norway 20 years ago where you have free cookies. When you were passing the security, there was a moment you could take some cakes offered by the airport. And all this system was being destroyed drop by drop, as you see. And the terms was 2005. So that was the terminal at the very beginning, very large. You had bench, you had sofas. It was nice. And then in red is the shop. And then they decided to extend the shop and to change the entry so that you go to the entry. And 1 year after, they have even extended the shop. And there was a moment they have. I don't know what happens with this thing. They have closed this little rest of the thing. They closed it. Yeah. So it means that you entered and you have 3 kids and you entered in a place where you have millions of Smarties and sweets and things. And for those who are parents here, you understand what I mean and what it means. But it's not only that; it's you're forced to go for 300 meters to a space where you were not expecting to enter with there. So we have. First, we have deconstruct the space. So phase 1, we have done all the studies. We have done the statistics before and after. And then the statistics we put on an Excel sheet for showing that like 89 or 90% of the passengers were not taking the public space but the things until the moment where they closed the public space, where 100% of people were obliged to go there. And the phase 2 was to organize an action. And we did it at the airport, and we did it at the railway station, because you can always say the airport, this is privileged people. Actually, very few people, it's just privileged people that are working, so it's not so interesting. But the railway station, this is the workers and everybody, and that's the same punishment, so to speak. So we organized with the activists in Oslo 2 big action with the newspaper, with the press, so the camera were coming, the TV were coming, and then we have destroyed the barrier, and then we have opened the public corridor, free of commercial and things, and we have closed the duty-free shop. The police arrived, and that was a little bit a mess, but at the end, the result is that they have opened the public corridor, they have reduced the size of the shop, and the demand was there was no shop at all, so that you could go with your kids to take a train or a plane without them trying to grab the things on the shops or ask the parents. So create a conflict with the parents, because a kid, of course, when he's not able to say, to understand that it is not for him. And this whole project has started while in the small city where I live, there is an airport called Kristiansand. The day they closed this public corridor, and suddenly we arrived, I was with the whole family, and my son was like 3 years old, in this shop. And then we didn't understand where we were, and we arrived, you go out, you take the plane. My son, Oscar, he was walking like this. He had a 2-liter almost bottle of Chanel 5 perfume, 200 euros in his pocket that he was grabbing things. And then we arrived in the plane, and we thought, fuck, we have to give back. We were stealing 200 euros. We have to give back to the thing. And suddenly I thought, no, fuck, we keep the bottle, and we make a project. And the bottle is still at home, and then we will frame it, and it's actually it will be a picture symbolical of this, to try to launch this duty-free shop project. But I don't want to stay at the airport. I want really to say that these are the whole of our public space, which is really threatened more and more. And this is what I want to deconstruct through maps, through activities, through actions, through artistic installation, etc. So this really, to answer precisely to your question, that it's really, we have forecasted this phase 2, but lately there is a reinforcement of security, and there is really much more stress regarding to the security linked to the terror attack, etc. So when you organize an action in the street, the reaction of the police and the authority can be pretty brutal and violent, and then it can just not happen because you were prevented to do it, even though you are in place. So we are really in a situation which is evaluating pretty fast, which is personally worrying me, because it's a reinforcement of the populist, reinforcement of the rejection of the other. It's less and less possible to do action in the streets for this reason, that there is a stress over the security, etc. So, and we try to include all those elements within the analysis, and if we can, this is a little bit perceptive elements or emotional element, and we try also to put it in the map, so to speak. Yeah. So, but we have to be very inventive. It's not easy, and I still don't have the solution.
That's very inspiring. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I have a question in terms of rendering style. Like, you've used this kind of rendering style, which is very hand-drawn, and you have other rendering styles where it's very precise lines, and things are more uniformly put together, very clean. Can you talk about the strategy of using one over the other?
Yes, absolutely. We can. I can do it. When I said that I consider cartography not as an end of itself, or something which would be like, you know, an artist, he is producing an artwork, and everything is around the artwork. And it's really, I don't know how to say, something in itself, really the opus. And I have never considered the map as an opus, although it could be interesting or striking, or people can like it. I have no problem with that. Like, for example, I'm thinking about this map of Africa, which I have been creating because I wanted to show how African was taken into the net of the the IMF and the World Bank, and then like trapped in the economic system. And the best way I found to do it is to use the idea of a Jean Tinguely machinery, if you know this artist. And for any reason, I did it because I thought that was the best way to do. This map went worldwide. In each single museum of image, you find this map with the narrative that comes together with about how Africa is right in the middle of things. And it has been done for the Museum of Modern Art in Vienna because it was showing the specific relationship of Africa with Vienna in the framework, in the context of the world circulation. So to answer the question, it's really a tool to try to make it understand. And if it's a tool, I never know. I try to choose the one which is the most appropriate. The most appropriate. It means that to go from, you have an intention and you draw a map mentally. It's here. It's in your mind. And the most difficult is to go from the mind to the image. So this is the sketch 0 that you have. You see? It's really, I hate this software because you have this idea, you are in Vienna, you discuss with the curator of the museum, and he says, so what's your idea about this relationship between Vienna and the thing? The article is available on Vision Carto. It's called Waypoint to Sharon Stone. And Waypoint to Sharon Stone, this is not Sharon Stone, the actor, but Sharon Stone was the center. It's a lady which owns a shop in the middle of Vienna, and her name is Sharon Stone. She's from Ghana. And the artistic project was to start from Sharon Stone's shop because it was where concentrate all the African cultural activities. They came to her shop. She was selling goods. She was hairdresser. She was selling perfumes. She was selling things for the hair. So that was like in Ghana, most probably. And then by concentric circles, we have been investigating what was the relationship between Sharon Stone's shop and the rest of Vienna, Austria, and Africa. So we were there, and then we have been starting by this. So that was the first step. And this sketch 0 is a very, for me at least, I don't know, maybe others do the same, it's a very important step because this is the first visualization of something, of an idea you have. And after that, I have no religion whether I will use a very precise digitalized Illustrator or GIS software for implementing or just having the thing. I have very little time in life, so I'm very pragmatic. I have 3 kids, which takes time. So I try to do as fast as I can. And sometimes for some issues, if just a draft, a little bit clean is enough to convey the message, I don't go further. I just do it like this, and then it makes it a little bit more authentic, maybe. I use specific pens, which are very fat, so you can have a very subtle effect in the intensity, for example. I use a specific paper called velin in French, which is what you have seen with this pattern behind, because it gives a structure. And after I'm choosing the colors according to a specific taste, and then it gives a landscape, which is the way I see the world, which is imagination, and which goes around the world. Like, I don't know, I compare this to a poetry that people like, and then it's there. It gives an atmosphere. It's artificial things. It can be beautiful. It can be horrible, but it's there, and then you remember it as it is, as an intellectual construction or as an artistic construction. So this is the first thing, and then after we go to sketch 1 and sketch 2 and sketch 3. You have a perfect idea in your mind. Sketch 0 goes down. It's very disappointing. Sketch 1, sketch 2, sketch 3, and you stop when you start to be comfortable with the representation you have, which is faithful to the idea you had of the object. So you see here, it's a sketch. It's a typical sketch 1 after the sketch 0. And then in between you have some others, but at the end you have something like that. Afterwards, you of course you see, for example, with this project, this geography of war. I made the two. Examples here. You have a very precisely digitalized map that shows the world in war, where the war occurs, and it's digitalized. And I was a little bit disappointed by this because this is too precise. And the area of war or the area of tension, it's not like that in my imagination, in my thoughts. It's not happening like that. And here, there was missing anyway some actors.
Becomes like professional cartography.
Yeah. The problem is that I have not put here the. Yeah, sorry, it's on the website. So there is the same map but drawn with the color pen. And one of the three reasons why I was implementing this sketch with color pen finalized that has to be published is that it's rehabilitating the cartographic unprecision. I don't know how to say this different, but it was important to show that we are not interested by precisions because we are not topograph. We don't need to, we don't navigate with planes, or we don't need to refer ourselves precisely on the territories or on the space, but we need to describe some trends. And if we need to describe some trends, in this case, the sketch is absolutely good enough, even though the sketch could be very precise. I had, but it's not here. Oh yes, I have something that can illustrate. Like this one, for example. This is it's very simple. Maybe this one actually is one of the maps which is represented there. Again, there is very simple. There is a very strong message behind that. And to convey this message, you absolutely don't need to put any effort or any resource or financial resource to do more, because digitalizing a map costs money, because it's we have to take drawers or I can do it myself, but it's one day of my time, and then I just don't have this day. But this is enough to show, for example, here, this is who needs a visa or not to enter Europe. The question is extremely minimal and simple. And then suddenly you have the image of the world, which is absolutely symmetric. In green, this is the friends, very rich. They don't need to pay a visa for entering Europe and the Schengen area. In red, you have the poorest country in the world, and they need to pay awfully much a price of a visa when they get it to enter Europe, with one exception here, which is in Europe, Kosovo. And within the world of friends that doesn't need to pay for a visa, you have enemies. You have here island of people which needs to pay for a visa, but they are isolated. And on the other side is the same. Here in this world of undesired people, you have the richest country in Asia. So there is really a perfect symmetry, and this is a question. This is a paradox why the poorest people in the world should have to pay sometimes the equivalent of 1 year revenue to be able to do something which is a human right to travel wherever you want. Here, the sketch is absolutely enough, and you see nothing is of a coincidence. Sometimes I even don't put the fonts, but I write by hand. The pattern here, and the pattern is part of the artistic choice. It's for giving a continuity in the productions, for the people to recognize where the map is coming from. It's like a signature, it's like an identity. And of course, this, I'm not completely struck on this. There is, I try to give a little bit an evolution. Yes, I found out the one I wanted to show to you, because it's really answering your question. And here you have the two. Those sketches. There was a whole series, and I was very tempted to send you this series, which is called The World Seen From. And this experiment was really tremendously interesting. We traveled all over the world with 2 people, and we were interviewing in each country a representative échantillon, how do you say, group of people from really very high level to citizen in the street. This one was in Cracovie and Varsovie, so this is Poland. The world seen from Poland. Questions were very simple. There is a whole protocol, the same for everybody. How do you see your country in the context of Europe? How do you see your country in the context of Europe plus Asia? How do you see your country in the world context? What do you think is the largest threat to Poland? What do you think is the hope for Poland? What's your dream? And then we have interviewed 15 people. We have discussed in Cracovie and in Poland, and we have gathered this very qualitative, emotional, sensitive information, and we did a cocktail out of this. So we are really here in a complete subjective map, but there is things that is coming back. And this is the sketch 0, and it's interesting because we already in the sketch 0, we have understood that there has a specific relationship with Russia, those Polish people, you see. So the way we have depicted it was really, already we had ideas on how we wanted to do things, and it was not extremely clear with Germany, but we thought that there was a way to represent Europe with differently. So we went through, after this sketch, a number of stages to, at the end, produce this map called One Dream, Two Nightmares. And the dream is this link to Europe, which is extremely clear. And they still need a visa to go to the United States. So they are dreaming of America, and they are open the country, and they are really giving a lot. But the Americans, they just still fit on humiliating them by not allowing them to do many things that they are allowed to do in Poland. And Two Nightmare, with this, we found this representation with these extremely violent teeth, red teeth here, with this red that goes progressively to the yellow on the side, because the Polish people are still living today on historical trauma. Poland has been shared 4 times, and it stays there. And it means what this trauma, which today wouldn't be a threat especially, but why it is important, because the policies that they are implementing, the money they are spending, are based on those trauma. Exactly like in Europe, they are closing the border to migrants because they take this decision on something which is not true. There is no crisis, there is no waves of migrants coming. But they do it because they think that there is a wave. But it's in imagination. Although we pay millions of euros to Frontex to prevent those people to come and they die and everything. It's the same here. So the Polish people, they have given a lot of money to these countries to make to have a buffer, except Belarus because it's a little bit special, but clear here, Ukraine and Georgia, to have like a security belt in between them and Russia because they still are completely scared of it. And when the Russians decided to build this Nord Stream gas pipeline here and the South Stream gas pipeline, the Ministry of Defense in 2006, he said, because then it means that they wouldn't need Poland for the transit of the gas, so they would lose like 20% of their GNP because it was a lot of money, that the construction of Nord Stream, and it's a public statement, the construction of Nord Stream by the Russian is an act of war worse than the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement in 1939, when they decided to share the country in 1939. So you see, this kind of statements, it's like,
All out of this map. Just all that came out of just this.
Yeah. And the quote is somewhere in the narrative. So what is interesting here is that it's complex, but it's rather simple. It's a base for a narrative, and you can back up what you see on the map by historical event. I'm not inventing it. I mean, the statement is public. It's there. It's referenced in the archives, and you see, it's very clear that they want to harm Ukraine. They want to harm Poland, and there is really a war on this guy's pipeline. And this is where I think mapping is tremendously fascinating. I'm interested to make appearing what is invisible to our eyes if we don't do this. And this is why I was saying this morning that I aim that the map itself is providing a knowledge, like a text provides a knowledge, and get out of its role of pure illustration of the text, if you see what I mean. When it's interesting when the map itself become a providing of knowledge. But for this, of course, we have to implement a very strict protocol and very strict methodology so that we are absolutely credible and absolutely clean in the scientific point of view, although we work with material which is very unconcrete, which is very emotional, very perceptive, but after all, there is many science also which is working with this material in psychology, sociopsychology, or whatever, so why not geographers? So I hope I answered to the question, but you see that you have several variations, and I have shown some examples where you have, like this one is the work on the margin. Here, for example, we were investigating if it's possible to identify two kinds of geographical margin, external and internal. So we use this Greek terminology, endoreic margin, Sahara, exoreic margin, Russia with his pourtour. But here, for I don't remember what reason, we have decided to produce the map very precisely because there was a need for that. So there is, here again, there is no religion. I think I truly adapt the technique or the technology to the need for conveying the message. So here it's also, we are searching, you know, radical cartographers, we try things. And if it doesn't work, we go backward and we take it over. So we were trying to explain that the margin, here you have the margin of Russia, and Russia has an influence of those margins, which is described here. Here you have a territory which is totally out of control for many different reasons of the nation state all around. So we call it a margin. It's at the margin of what they can do, but it's not an external margin. It's a new concept, internal margin. So yeah, we try it, and then we try to develop the things, we propose it, and the geographers or the academics, either they take the ownership of that and they use it because they find it's interesting and they develop it, or this is where we are participative.
Go back to your map, please. It's not coming to the speaker.
No, it's
It's like the Monty Python, they would have done that. So speaking in a microphone without where it
Military
is.
presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is very brief. You have a workshop to map fears tomorrow, but it's sold out, so I cannot attend. Is the content, how to do it, is it available online? I can do it on my own?
I don't catch your question.
Tomorrow you have a workshop
Yeah.
to map fears. It is sold out, no more space, so I cannot attend.
Okay.
Do you have how to do it, the content of your workshop online that I can look up?
No, online no, but I have actually a protocol, which is unfortunately, I wanted to translate the main of this protocol tomorrow. I didn't have the time to do it before I came. It's extremely well described. What we will do for the workshop tomorrow, it's very well described. I have this protocol in French. It's like 10 pages. It's very precisely described. And we have already implemented this workshop a dozen of times all over Europe. I think it's the first time we do it in North America. And basically, what we do, shall I say a little bit about the workshop, because there is a question? The idea, the exercise is called, in French, dessiner ma carte d'identité. But in French, le mot carte means that your identity card is the same word that you use the card, and map in French is the same word. But in English, the expression doesn't work, but it's basically drawing the map of you and your life. And there is a protocol on this map. This is the way you use the world, the way you see the world, and it includes different elements which is in relationship with your life, with the place you think is important for your cultural identity, the place you like, the place you dislike, the place which is a dream, the place which you fear. So it's very much related to the way you absorb the news and you know about the world. So the interest is, of course, that it allows yourself to estimate the extent of your own knowledge, because when you do this exercise, you really understand that you are really far from the thing. So it's interesting for that. But you put yourself on the map. I invite the participants to collect all the information on yourself so that you could project yourself on the map. And this is why I called it the identity map. The idea behind this is three things. First, to learn really technically how to do a map from scratch to the end. Collect the information, select this information, sort by qualitative, quantitative data. But the information you do yourself, it's your information. Places where you go once a week, once a month, once a year, never. Place you like, place you dislike, etc. All this. There is a whole checklist of that. You can also introduce elements of geopolitics, elements of climate change, whatever. So everything is allowed. But what I absolutely require is that you follow the methodology. First, you collect the information. Secondly, you analyze the information and you sort your information. Then you try to find some visual representation mode to express what is your collection of information. Of course, there is no map if you didn't have research before information. And this passage is tricky. It's difficult for some people to figure out how you could visualize a movement, how you could visualize the place which is extremely important for your cultural identity, which you are very emotional with, or things like that. And while you have done this map, I require that, so I have some extract of a text of Kandinsky, 1926, he writes a book, Ligne et point sur plan, French, line and point on the surface, which is a very, very abstract, it's a difficult work, but when you have read it 10 times and understood what he meant, you really have the base of, I use that each day. I think it's the absolute base of what cartography is, surface with points which are joined by line. On top of that, my approach and the concept is 3+1, because you have those three fundamental elements plus all the reference. You populate your map with a legend, with text, with a terminology, and we have been speaking on how important it is to choose the appropriate one, isn't it? And while you do this, and I think if you have a good control over this concept of 3+1, you have solved 50% of what is difficult in mapping. The only problem is to choose the elements. If a certain element of your life is a movement, is it a line or is it a point? This element, is it a surface, or shall I represent it as a punctual element? You see, there is, here in this map, you have surface, you have point, and you have lines. And you see that lines, they are joined, points, they are joined by lines. So you have here a very complex example of mapping complexity, but it's ordered in a way that it's, I make it a little more clear. And I want that you use, during this exercise, those 3+1 elements. So in the map, I expect to find surfaces, points, and lines. I expect that the legends correspond to what is in the map. This is also very important. We never think about this, but sometimes we draw the map by thinking we do the things. But this has to be explained with the appropriate terminology. And I expect afterwards also that the map has a title, which could be either generic, I don't know, wars in Africa, or journalistic, horrible, bloody wars in Africa that kills millions. So that's a journalistic title, for example. That you can give the sources, but in this case, it came from you, so the sources would be your name plus maybe you have the right to seek on internet, so you have to list the source, and the credit, because we expect that the map is like a text, like a narrative. It's the expression of your vision, so it's important to have your credit, your signature. It's not coming out of the blue like we think maps in the newspaper, they're very rarely signed. But behind there is either the vision of the cartographer or its sponsor. I think like in the New York Times, for example, I know one of the guy doing the infographics. There have been a battle in the New York Times so that they could get their name. And the New York Times says, no, this is the view of the New York Times, so it signed the New York Times. Although it is the journalists, they are signing their paper. And there is still this idea that the map is really a technical object that brings. So it's less and less now. We arrive a little bit more to make understand that this exercise of mapping and infographic also brings a lot to the knowledge and help to better understand how the world is working. But we are not still there. So there is still this thing. So this is basically roughly described the things. But tomorrow I have half an hour to come back for the participants to this. And I will go through, I can show you, if we have time, I can show you some few examples. I didn't select it now, but I can select it. It's here. This was in Saint-Étienne, so it was here. The workshop. Yeah, it's this one. Some examples of what the people have done, and you will see that surprisingly, I thought that most of the candidates would do very traditional and classical representation. It went that there was a huge creativity, it has developed huge creativity, but we had a little bit more than 3 hours. We had the whole afternoon, so that's why I was challenging a little bit the 18 that it started at 6 o'clock, but I think we managed. Like if we have 6 to 9, if the people are really enthusiastic, they will stay a little bit more after, so it's fine. So this is the skeleton of my map, and then I decided that I would do something like very round on the circulation of all the generation of my family. We have had this kind of things. So what I find also interesting that it's very rich because it's very free. The instructions are very strict. They have to follow this protocol, but they can choose any kind of form they want. And so there is a paradox because at the same time you have really a protocol which is you have to follow. You can't go over the steps. But what you do with this protocol, the form you give to the map is totally free. So we have had that. This is Dora. And what is interesting also with people not absolutely familiar with the graphical semiology, they invent a semiology by themselves. And sometimes it's the good old sense. They are very close to the semiology that we are using. And I find it extremely fascinating. Yeah, something like that comes natural. Yeah, we have this kind of 3D maps. We have had that. So we have hundreds and hundreds, and it's actually a project by itself to bring together those maps and to make a publication actually out of this, which probably will be a scientific publication. This is from a North Korean student. This one is from students coming from North Korea that I met in Goldsmith. I'm not sure how she has arrived there, but also we're speaking about mapping without map, typical, also extremely interesting representation of the world. I just love this. This is a student from Israel. You see, this is Israel, and he said, "Yeah, I will show you what's my perception." So you see the threats and the semiology that he was choosing. He's also depicting, very active in leftist like Tayush or B'Tselem organizations. But even though you see there is this kind of representation. So yeah, this is very interesting also because you have the introduction of a movement, smooth artistic, and he says, "Yeah, I see the world. The word I'm using like a flowers with petals, and then I jump from petals to petals." And he wrote a whole poetry about this. And very often I get out of those workshops extremely charmed and very moved. So for me, it's also extremely interesting. And the participants are very moved also because I gave the key to enter in the world that they wanted to know better. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but sometimes you want to do things and you don't know how to formalize, and you just have to have a recipe or to have the key to enter the door of things. An attempt of my map also. So this is my family working here and there. So you see many different, And many different styles, but they are looking like it's the same principle, but the styles they implement are very different. Oh, well, okay, so this was something else. Soviet imagery. So to answer your question, this is that. But if you're interested, I propose you contact Patricio, and Patricio will have. I think tomorrow I will take 2-3 hours to translate in English for the non-French speakers most of the protocol, so that we are clear for and print the message so that we are clear for 6 o'clock. And I'm very much looking forward. I think there is like 30 people, so we will see how the things will go.
If there is time, may I get on to the second question? Thanks so much for the rich response. Amazing. Yeah, it's about a world mapped to represent the relative size of countries in the world. So conventionally, we have one map done during the old times. It was, I think, done called the Mercantor projection. It's done by those countries who colonized the southern countries. And in fact, the map I say to stay on it shows the relative size of Britain compared to like India or Africa. It's so big, Britain. Then later on, I think in the 80s, they have another projection. It's not elongated, probably you know. It shows a better representation of the world countries relative to each other. And then later on, I think, is it Buckminster Fuller shows a Dymaxion map. So my question is, why is there resistance? Even in UN, they still use the #1 map. Why is such a resistance? Is it very political?
Yeah, so there is two ways to answer the question. The first thing, I don't think it's a resistance, and I don't think there is a political will behind choosing systematically a Mercator map. I think it's a coincidence. I think we are more facing ignorance, geographic ignorance from the people, because most of the people now today implementing mapping on the web. They are not geographer or cartographer, and they take usually the first base map they find on the internet, or the first one they know, which is basically Mercator or equivalent. Well, the two guys who created Google Map, they wanted to call it Google World, and they thought, oh no, Google World, it's too colonialist, it's too, they will accuse us that we want power and everything. And they said, we will call it Google Map because it's much better. But still, they have been using the Mercator map, which is by essence the most colonialist map ever, because it increased the size of the empire compared to things. And recently, I think they have changed, so that was a revolution, because they will give up this projection, and they will take a projection that gives the more right size of the countries. So to answer the first question, there is no resistance. I wouldn't interpret that as a resistance, but more as an ignorance of it. And I'm still struck by the fact that in all the WMO, the World Health Organization, WHO, they all have GIS services, cartographic services, including actually the HCR, and they are working with this base map they find on any GIS software without thinking further about the projection. I have not evocated it here, but I have a whole conference on the choice of projection and what it means politically. Now, just for you to know, most of the time have not been presenting this here, but we are using this projection, which is the projection by Jacques Bertin, this one. And this one has an interest because it gives, I don't know why it's so difficult to, it gives approximately the right size. It's still too big in the northern latitude, but it's much better. It's improved compared to the Mercator. And it shows also the way that North America is facing the things that it shows, and it has explained that during the Cold War, Europe was at the margin of the Cold War. It was not because on the normal things, it was right in the middle. So the Europeans has always thought they were right in the middle of the battlefield, which has never been true, because the real front line was the Arctic area, because the missile were going that way, and they would have completely avoid Europe, which were not absolutely not in the front. So we used these projections. Jacques Bertin, 1953, and it was drawn until 2 years ago, until my colleague Philippe Rekacewicz, the mathematician, he's a scientist I'm working with, and I'm the artist in the group, and he's the coder, so to speak. And he has coded this map with this projection, which now is available in any GIS software possible. And it's a great progress because it was widely used, but it was not coded, so nobody could use it. Now, so this is interesting to have this kind of projection because you have the world georeference and everything. But what we try to do also is to implement the idea of the anamorphosis or the cartogram, like this one. This one, as you see, is representing Europe. This is the Schengen area. And here, instead of representing the country, we have replaced the surface of the country by an indicator. And here, the size of the country is relative to the GNP, the total GNP. And the interest of this is to show the relative weight value of a country within the space, within the European Union. So this is the reason we have done like that. And the result of that is also to give more information that you wouldn't see on a normal map. And it's shown, it's shown here in this anamorphosis. This is a Russian geographer, Vladimir Tikhonov, from the University of Moscow. Has the first, now it's very common, so everybody has its own algorithm. Any department of geography or cartography in the world, they have developed this algorithm. They have more or less copied the code, more or less. But this one has been created by Vladimir Tikhonov in early 90s. He was really the first one at the Department of Geography, University of Moscow. And it was still Soviet Union when he started to develop that. This anamorphosis, where he has created a system where the country remains together, but the surface is relative to the indicator you plot. And here, the indicator, there is a double indicator. The size, this is the GNP, the global GNP in $1 billion. And the color represents the GNP per capita. But this is a standardized indicator, so you can't have a size because when it's standardized, when you have a percentage or a GNP per habitant, it puts all country at the same level, so you can't see which one is more big or but if you have by billions, you know, and here the GNP per capita with his algorithm, anamorphose, was showing an extremely interesting vision because it was showing an Africa which was symbolically completely squeezed, so little GNP they had, and those very rich countries with the big things which were on the edge to explode, like so rich they were. And this image also went viral at that time and was really widely used all over the world to represent the discrimination and the difference between poor and rich. And since then, really a lot of people have developed the things, but what is interesting with this one is that it's the first, Vladimir was really the pioneer, he was really the first one. And as usual, those people very modest, they create things and they disappear. So nobody knows that. This may be our role to go back to the history and to say, no, yeah, sorry, your anamorphosis is very good. You make atlases and you make money out of it, but don't forget that the father, the first one which was writing this and inventing the system, this is Vladimir Tikhonov, and he has to be recognized as the father. And we do it for him because he couldn't care less. I mean, he plays guitar, he drinks vodka, he has a good life. He's just genius, but. And this has been used and reused without being quote anytime. For example, in this one was, at Marburg, so, some geographer, when they know me, they took the picture and they send it to me. So this is exactly the same one. And you see, it was used, if you speak a little bit German, by activists which are organizing conference to say, well, you see, the world is poor, we have to stop, we have to be active, etc. And the most funny things is that just beside there is an advertisement for a movie with Picsou, and you know this character, He's the one who gets enormously much of money. So I like very much the symbol of this image here. And there is many way of doing those anamorphoses. Either you have the code and the system of Vladimir, but you can do, if you are not Vladimir Tikhonov and if you're not mathematician, you can always produce your own anamorphosis by calculating the surface relative to the indicator. Here, this is the GNP, but it can be production of potatoes or whatever. I mean, you're completely free to do whatever you want in this respect. So this is it. I hope it's answering the question.
Great, thank you. So
Yeah.
whoever's here next tomorrow, you'll be available for questions. Yeah, thank you very much for so much information, and it's so comprehensive.
Yeah. So everybody has left, but I think I will give you the images, and then you can disseminate the images. There is no requirement for the use. The only things, like I said, we are like cows. We want to be traceable. The meat has to be traceable. So we just expect that, like all the academics usually do, is just to quote where it's coming from, so that you can trace actually the things. Most welcome. Thank you very much.